I'm Ryan Haggerty with Haggerty Media, and today we're going to be talking about using the image processor feature in Photoshop to help us save some time with processing multiple images. We're really going to focus on uploading these images to the web, but there are other features of the image processor that you might find useful in other applications. So the software that you see open before you right now is actually Adobe Bridge. You can access image processor through Photoshop on its own, but I find that accessing it through Bridge allows me to more easily select multiple images, which I'll explain here in just a moment. So let's take a look while we're in Bridge at these actual images and the file sizes and see why we might want to change these for the web. So if I select this image here in Bridge, I can go over and I can see both the resolution and the file size, and notice that while 2.63 megabytes is not a huge file, when you are trying to upload that, or for your end user who's trying to view that on their device on the other end of the internet, that does tend to cause some issues with download speeds. And, if you imagine someone using a data connection from their smartphone device or tablet, it could be causing them some issues with how quickly they can view your image. The other thing is, with a image resolution of this size, which is close to the original 16 megapixels, screens don't really take advantage of that image size. Your average screen today is going to be anywhere between 1280 by 720 to perhaps up to a larger HD screen, 1920 by 1080, and even some higher resolutions than that. But for an image of this type, we don't have screens that view this resolution, so why would I want to upload that to the web? So we're going to look at a way that we can quickly change the settings for all 10 of these images by using the image processor to create a better user experience for our end user, and also to save us time, which is always a good thing. So I'm just going to go through and select all 10 of these images, and I'm going to go up in Bridge to the menu here under Tools, and we do have quite a few options here. I'm interested in the Photoshop menu under the Tools menu, and I'm going to go to Image Processor. If you're in Bridge and you don't have Photoshop open, at this point it will open Photoshop and open the Image Processor dialog. It might take just a couple seconds to load up Photoshop, and then you'll get to this point. We have a couple different settings that we can change here depending on what we're trying to do with the images that we are processing. The first of which you'll notice, it actually tells you how many images you are getting ready to process, which could be helpful if you have a whole bunch of images and you want to make sure you got them all. The second thing that it's going to allow us to do is actually tell these images where to save. So yours by default might say save in same location, which basically would save them down here in a separate folder from these images, and that's where I would go to look for them after they're done processing. I'm actually going to create a new folder, so I'm going to go with the second option, select the folder where I'm going to save, and I've already navigated to the folder where these images live, and I'm just going to go over and select New Folder. And since these are going on the internet, I'm going to select Web, or create a web folder, and open. So now the images are going to be saved within that folder. So that's the first two set of options there. The third option actually allows you to convert these images to different file types, which is pretty useful when you're dealing with multiple images to quickly be able to save them as a different kind of file. For instance, we have our good old-fashioned JPEG up here. We also have our PSD files that we can convert to, or you could also convert to a TIFF file. For web use, JPEG is going to give us a decently high quality image with a smaller file size, which is the goal of processing these images today. So I'm going to make sure that's selected. Right underneath that, you do have a quality option. You've noticed this option if you've saved a JPEG out of Photoshop before. And if you want to go up to max quality, you want to be somewhere around 10, 11, or 12. However, since we're going to the web, We are willing to sacrifice a little bit of quality to maintain a smaller file size. And you could go lower than this, but I find 8 to be a good quality size as far as keeping the file size small without getting the image looking too terrible on the screen. In addition to that, the other thing that we had noted in the original files, the resolution was really high. So we are going to check this additional box here, resize to fit, and I've already entered in 800 pixels, which you could go a little bit larger than this for web viewing purposes, say maybe 1,000 pixels. And at first glance, you might think this is going to actually make a square image that's 1,000 pixels by 1,000 pixels. But what we're actually telling the image processor to do is to look at the longest dimension, whether that's the width if you're looking at a landscape photo, or the height if you're looking at more of a portrait orientation photo, and make that dimension be that many pixels, and then it'll figure out how long to make the other dimension. So we don't have to do all that fun math. So that's the first two options there under file type for JPEG. The third option actually deals with something called your color profile. And sRGB is the preferred color profile for the web. So for all intents and purposes, you should go ahead and have that check marked off. May get into color profile with a different tutorial explaining some of the differences there, but for you guys to know right now, go ahead and check that off, and that'll make sure that the image that you're previewing is going to look the same for the people that are on the other end of the internet viewing your images. So I mentioned before, we're not going to be saving as a PSD or a TIFF, but if you need to process images for that purpose, you can do it very quickly by selecting one of those options. The fourth set of options here is called preferences. The only one that I'm going to worry about entering in information today is for this copyright info. And this won't actually put it like a watermark on your image. It will not do that. But what it will do is embed it into the file so that whether somebody is right-clicking on the image and selecting Get Info or Properties, or if they're opening it with a program, they can see who actually owns the image. The other two options that we can click here, you have Run Action, which in Photoshop you can set up some custom actions and apply multiple changes to this batch process of images here. And it'll very quickly go through, for instance, this first action would apply a vignette to all of the images. If you want to set that up in Photoshop and try that out for yourself, you can. We're really just changing the size and the compression of the image for our purposes today. The additional option here, which includes the color profile, if you'll recall, we're converting this to sRGB. If you wanted it to also embed that profile in the image in case you were going to open it again later into Photoshop, you could select that option as well. So at this point, just to recap, we've selected 10 images. We've told it where we'd like it to save. We've compressed the image as a JPEG. We've also set the resolution for it, and we're converting its color profile to sRGB. And we also have embedded a copyright piece of copyright info there into the image. So at this point, they are ready to process for the web. So I'm going to go ahead and click on Run. And Photoshop is going to start processing each individual image. If you have other programs open, you may notice this process takes a little bit longer. Also, depending on the performance of your computer, your CPU, RAM, graphics processor, this might take a little bit longer. It might be a good time to go get a coffee break. But it looks like we are done with ours. And I'm just going to scroll down. And remember, we created a new folder here called Web. And if I go inside of there, since I selected JPEG, it actually created an additional folder called JPEG. And here are my images. So just to illustrate that we do have a smaller file size, I'm going to click on this one, and if you'll recall, before we had over a 2 megabyte file, now we're down to 240 kilobytes, which is reasonably manageable even on a slower data connection such as a 3G network on a smartphone. The resolution is also smaller, so here's my 1000 pixels on my width, 667 pixels on my height, and same thing on this one, only it reversed it, 1000 pixels on my height, 667 pixels on my width. So that has gone through and automatically processed all 10 of those images without me having to individually open and change those parameters in Photoshop. So that concludes the tutorial. I hope you found it useful, and you might want to check out some of the other tutorials on Haggerty Media on YouTube. Thank you.